something that if you make sure that you get your credentials sorted for this, then you can do that yourself every time, eh?
Yes. Yes. Also useful for muting people when necessary.
Yeah,
Cool.
and
So
anyone, any other lead, workstream lead with the credentials can do it as well, right? So
right.
just for your information.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, we are 5 past the hour now, so we can get started. I did send out an agenda earlier today, so for those of you who've seen that, you know what we're planning on discussing today. The main focus that we wanted to focus on today was a discussion that came up last time in the last call of January, which was around the types of baseboards that OCP and OCP documents recommend and talk about in our requirements, right? So for those of you who weren't on that last call, I prepared a bit of background information, some slides to kind of explain the context of that debate before we get into the details. So yeah, some context to that discussion. So at the moment, OCP documents, immersion documents, recommend in different ways only certain classes of fluids for immersion cooling. So one of the main examples of this right now is in the immersion requirements document, the current revision 2.1, in section 4.3, which describes dielectric fluid quality management guidelines. In the single phase fluid section, there's these statements that mineral oils should be avoided. Only synthetic oils, synthetic esters, or processed natural esters should be used. And previous, sorry, I think this is an older version. I didn't have the rest of it. The second point there should be that previous community documents, such as the material compatibility and immersion document, have only described as well certain types of baseboards, which have not included what could be described as mineral oils. I'm just going to double check I've got the latest version before I continue. So if you'll just bear with me 1 second, I just want to make sure I've got the latest version of these slides. Okay, let's try that again. Once I shared earlier. So yeah, apologies for that. So yeah, like I was saying, other documents have only talked about certain types of synthetic hydrocarbons, GTL and PAO. And the last point here is that this is going against a little bit what's emerged in the market in the last few years, where we now see several immersion fluid vendors that are offering immersion fluids that do not strictly fit within these categories. So to explain a little bit more behind the OCP, why we've ended up with those types of statements and those types of classifications. When it comes to the material compatibility document, going back to when that was put together, there was basically an open community input at the time for anyone who had immersion cooling experience with different fluids and had done material compatibility tests. There was an open call for submissions of data from the different types of fluids, right? And really the only serious data we received there were from these categories of fluids. So there were synthetic data from synthetic hydrocarbons, PAO, synthetic hydrocarbon GTL, synthetic esters, natural esters, and PFCs at the time. In addition to that, there have also been historically several reports, I'd say reports of anecdotal reports of issues with mineral oil fluids in immersion. So typically you would hear things like potentially accelerated corrosion from trace amounts of sulfur, poorer material compatibility, especially when it comes to elastomers and certain plastics, odor issues. So again, you know, people who are not coming from perhaps the industry that some of you are coming from would report things like a motor oil smell, and oxidation. By that I mean, you know, poorer oxidation over time. So one thing that some of you might have picked up on here is what we actually mean by mineral oil, right? What's the definition there? And I think that kind of brings us to the challenge of this issue, and maybe where we want to kick off the discussion. So a lot of you would be familiar with the petroleum lubricant oil industry classifications of fluids, right? So mineral oil, I think it's worth starting by saying it's a fairly vague term, but generally I would say in this context we're referring to oils that are derived from refining and distilling crude oil. Synthetic hydrocarbons are hydrocarbons or oils, technically speaking, formed by chemical reaction. However, this is, again, for those of you who are familiar, it can also be a vague term, right? That generates debate between things like PAO versus hydrocracked petroleum oils or GTLs, right? And so the petroleum industry so API have created these classes of base oils, which I've summarized in this table here. Again, a lot of people who are familiar with the different ways of grouping. So group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, and group 5. As you can see from this table, however, these groups are often defined, or strictly speaking, they're defined based on properties that do not match up with the properties that we talk about in immersion cooling. So if we were to take, for example, the immersion requirements document as a guide on what are the kind of critical properties we should be talking about in immersion cooling, things like viscosity index are not relevant in our industry, nor are things like saturates or sulfur contents of this order of magnitude, right? So I think at the end of the day, if we were to take directly some of these groups, these group definitions, we're using definitions that are based on a completely different industry, on different properties and requirements, right? So that's the point I'm going to leave it. I guess in terms of expected outcomes, we can have an open discussion now. I'm interested to hear different viewpoints. We touched on it a little bit last time, but I'm sure a lot of people have different viewpoints. And I think the idea would be that if going back to things like the immersion requirements document, if we want to come up with a new proposal for these types of statements, that could be one potential outcome. We could argue in favor of keeping the status quo. It's a completely open discussion, right? So with all of that said, I'm going to open up the floor to anyone who would like to comment.
I can get it started. I think I maybe got all of this started, so apologies for that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Chris, I didn't realize you could make the call in the end.
I canceled the other. Yeah, I canceled the conflict.
Okay.
This was that important.
Appreciated. Yeah, sorry. So Chris, everyone who wasn't on the last call, Chris was actually I think the first one to bring this up. So yeah, really interested to hear your thoughts, Chris, on this.
Well, I come from the engine oil world where they like to create chemical limits in order to ensure compatibility with different devices. I am more of the data-driven person, so I would like to see us use data that indicates the quality of product that we're developing from the fluid manufacturer. The quality of product that I'm developing will meet some sort of data requirements that we have. And I understand that we don't necessarily know the limits for all of the performance requirements that we have. But if we know, for example, that sulfur is a problem, then set a sulfur limit. The problem with restricting base oils according to current definitions is that you miss the opportunity for technological improvements, for example, in the refining process that can produce much higher quality group 3 base oils that may have been derived from fossil fuels, but have gone through tremendous treatment within the refining process to deliver a higher quality product today than what was available 3-4 years ago. It also misses the opportunity to take advantage of re-refining. Re-refining takes existing lubricants, puts it back through the refining process to a lesser extent than what you do with something that you pull from the ground. And then it delivers, again, a higher quality product today than what may have been available 3-4 years ago. So I would just like to see us move away from labels and more towards property definitions to the extent possible. And I see Brian has a comment, so I can cede the floor to Brian.
Chris, I totally agree with you. I've been, I've never seen that API chart, even though I work for a lubricant company, where group 3 actually is called a synthetic. And so, I completely support your concept that it's the refinery process especially in the group 3 range that can drive the performance of things like sulfur, right? And other things. So there's a lot of processing and refinery steps that are actually, from what I understand, and I'm definitely not an expert, that are even in flux in the group 3 area for maybe even making an optimum immersion cooling fluid. So we're right in a way to not pick group 3, but it's also scary that someone that's a supplier might say they have group 3 and not know that they have a synthetic. So, or something that shows up as green on that API, because it's ultra refined. So I think that that's part of the label confusion and everything else. I think the other thing that would be a nice outcome from this is if, and I propose this as a likely scenario, if some of the fears of immersion cooling are from some of the mineral oil problems that existed in history, so that if we're chasing material compatibility issues or any other molecular contamination problems or whatever that occur with material compatibility, that maybe some of those problems that we've talked about for fluid quality were actually group 2 problems or less refined group 3 problems. And so I would hope that once we get past sort of the data, we could actually maybe even clean up some of our fears, uncertainty, and risk that we have presented in our documentation for immersion cooling with dielectric oils. That's it.
This is Michael from Valvoline. I agree completely with perspectives here. I think on our viewpoint, it's all about the compatibility and the specs that it needs to meet. We don't want to limit innovation, whether it's any other form of base oil or what might fall into these categories. So I think the API relevance is limited. And so using these other data requirements is the right way to go.
Yeah, this is Yin Yang calling from Valvoline too. I mean, just want to add on to it. I think on the slide, I think maybe someone already pointed out, like viscosity index is specifically for the lubrication application. It may not really relevant here. So I would agree we should use property driven instead of definition of the synthetic, I would think. Thank you.
This is Mariam from HF Sinclair. And so I also totally agree that it should be property driven instead of putting label or definition for the base oils.
So maybe, and I'm sure there are more comments, because there's also a comment in the chat that we can discuss, but maybe I could just pause there and maybe add a little bit more context from the other perspective, because I gather, yeah, a lot of you have experience and background on the fluid formulation side of things, but maybe not so much firsthand with immersion cooling deployments. So I think the challenge that we have right now is that with the argument that we make this purely a properties-based requirement or specification as opposed to labels or categories. I think the challenge we have right now is that we don't have a really solid way of guaranteeing certain properties, right? We don't know the limits of certain things. So to give a couple of examples, especially in the compatibility area, I think it's very hard for us. There is no current kind of, let's say, minimum standard or specification when it comes to material compatibility. And I think it's going to be very hard for us to define that. If we could, then I agree that might be one potential way forward. But I think that's going to be a concern and explains a little bit why we took the previous approach, where I guess partly through anecdotal experience, we found that using some of these synthetic fluids, which typically have a higher purity grade and so on, you don't have a lot of the compatibility issues that we're seeing early on. I think if we take away that, if we open up the floodgates in a sense, we do run the risk of not capturing some of those hard to define properties.
I'd like to support you with this a little bit, Peter, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I was keen to hear your opinion on this, Ralph. I think you originally drafted that text that we started with.
That is correct, right? And I would like to. I think you are very very appropriate with your use of the term anecdotal, and I respect that we have to classify it like that simply because there is no documentation trail in the public domain. As with my experience and also what I've seen in the industry, virtually every immersion vendor, immersion solutions developer and vendor, has started off with simple fluids, and every single one of them has stopped doing that. And none of them have publicly stated why, but it's like a public secret that a lot of these fluids that start out as refined fluids have proven to be a risk in various deployments, and that can relate to material compatibility, the chemical consistency of the fluid, which can change based on hotspots within the IT equipment. There have been various unofficial reports of potential hazards, potential contamination of the fluid resulting from, in particular, combined with the use of refined fluids. And we're not talking about just getting the motor oil from the from a manufacturer. We're talking about high purity base oils, which are typically of medicinal quality, suitable for with food grade certificates, you name it. And that's every immersion vendor that I'm aware of has learned to stick with PAOs or other synthetic fluids, because it greatly reduces the risk of the fluids. Now, and I've said this before, I myself am not a chemist. I do not know what exactly goes wrong with these, or has gone wrong with the refined fluids that we've seen and that every solution vendor stopped working with. And it would be good to get that out in the open. I cannot bring it out in the open. Maybe some of you can. But when there is a lacking of the understanding of what is going wrong with that, it's going to be difficult to formulate specific material properties that will prevent things from going wrong. Again, I am not a chemist. I don't know what exactly goes wrong. But there is a trend in the market where every solution manufacturer has gone through a process where they start ignoring the refined fluids and specifically focus on PAOs. Now, why is that? And we don't have a paper trail, so yes, technically it's anecdotal. But I would be very curious to learn more about how we can quantify material properties, and how we can ensure that some of these effects don't present themselves in a high value scale deployment. I think that's important to look at. And I'm not saying this because I don't agree with going ahead with this question. I think this is one of the most important questions that can be asked when it comes to fluids. I just want to highlight that there is a lot of knowledge and skills out there which is not in the open, which would be really valuable to get out in the open. Peter, I'm gonna yield now, but please correct anything that I've said that you feel needs correcting.
No, I think, yeah, very much agree with everything you said, and definitely just, I can see a few people with their hands up, so I'll let them also speak in a second, but definitely confirm what you said about the typical experience of immersion tank vendors, right? Coming from a company that's an immersion tank vendor, that's been our exact experience, right? Starting off with the typical, buying vegetable oils, to moving on to mineral oils, to eventually moving on to synthetic fluids. For those reasons, those unpublished reasons that you were referring to, which perhaps we can delve into more. With that said, Amy, I think you had your hand up first.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, hi everybody. I think I know most of you. I'm leading up the immersion requirements group, so kind of the sister group to the fluids and materials. So I want to, second that, and support Peter in this conversation, because I think it's really important moving forward that, one, we're focusing on providing guidance that enables safe operation and reliable performance over time for users in this space. It's really important for us to help, bring down those hurdles that prevent people from actually adopting immersion cooling. We need to do it in a way that allows for a safe operation, so there's not any kind of incident associated with their use of fluids in this space, whether it's an emergency situation or even just equipment degradation as a result of a mismatch of fluid with equipment. So we need to allow people to, or provide guidance with people that allows them that peace of mind that they have that appropriate match of the fluid for the application by providing those minimum requirements. So those minimum requirements are open to be changed as a result of this open discussion. And I'm not sure who said it, Chris, it might have been you, that we need to make sure that the minimum requirements aren't so restrictive that it prevents future innovation. So I think one of the changes that you all saw recently was in that safe handling document, we actually added a category for formulated fluid blends, which wasn't represented previously in the documentation, because that is a way that companies do approach this to boost the performance, while not trading off those aspects of quality associated with compatibility. So this is really great. What I do want to emphasize here is that for me, I am a chemist. It's really important that whatever guidance we provide is data-based, and moving to properties-based discussion is really, really positive thing for all of us. So understanding how we can actually translate those anecdotal stories into something that's more data-driven, that the requirements basis has a rationale and that has data behind it. I'd like to point out for people that are relatively new in these OCP immersion groups that compatibility chart that Peter provided or shared his screen on, we would welcome people that maybe don't feel like their product fits into one of those categories. We'd welcome a version of that compatibility document to be shared that represents your fluid experience. We also have a similar spreadsheet that allows you to provide thermal performance type data associated with your product. The more data that we have available to represent these different families of fluids, the easier it is to have that properties-based discussion. So I see this as a really important conversation. It's probably going to be something where Peter and Puneeth, you'll balance your group work with my group work, but if we can align on what properties are most important to capture and what those limits are that are most appropriate to ensure safe and reliable operation, data has to be that basis. And so, yeah, I just invite people to be able to actually support this initiative by providing data associated with your fluid if you don't feel like it is represented today.
Yeah, I think
excellent points, Amy. Sorry, Puneeth.
Sorry, Peter. I think one thing we are very open to have the conversation is to ensure that whatever we do, it should actually meet the customer requirements in the end. It has to perform. And as I keep saying from the beginning, it should be performance-driven specifications. We already have published last year. We are open for making recommendations now for anything, but the stage gate has to meet is whatever the new entry comes into this space, that has to meet the performance guidelines. So material compatibility is one piece, but it should also be performance driven in the end. Because at the end of the day, any end customer, the end user in this case, who is actually managing the data center or IT, is mostly interested in when the fluid is in the tank, it's running, it should operate without having any challenges in the near future. So I think we should keep that in mind, and then we are very open for having this conversation.
Right. I just want to quickly reinforce what Amy said as well about, that's if anyone has data to add to the material compatibility tables, that would definitely go a long way to kind of helping bridge the knowledge gap that we have at the moment. The data that we received there was from accumulated years of experience, I would say, of actual deployments of immersion systems, right? So when it comes to adding in, new fluids, I think that's kind of the bar that's been set for having that, to get that up to that confidence level, right? And I just wanted to really quickly also share something from the requirements document right now. So this one. So at the moment in the immersion requirements document in section 4.2, we have the minimum dielectric fluid requirements. I think the challenge we face, again, if we were just to purely stick to these requirements, there are a lot of fluids that would meet these requirements, but would, I'm almost positive, not be appropriate immersion cooling fluids. So I think, to take it to an extreme, I think there's a lot of even things like cooking oils, unrefined cooking oils, that could almost fit these requirements, but clearly wouldn't be suitable for for use as immersion fluids. So I think that's the kind of thing that we're trying to address here, right, in terms of defining new properties or things that we can control to ensure that minimum level of quality. So yeah, with that said, I think Samantha Yates was the next one with the hand up.
Yeah, I want to actually add, as a component vendor where I have a large variety of different materials that aren't actually enveloped in the tables that we have, because you can't account for them. The one really huge piece of data that's missing that is not even really being collected and is very difficult to collect is the impact of all of the materials that we put into the fluid from the servers and the impact of that contamination on the degradation of fluids. So all of these fluid specs, all of these fluid requirements don't actually account for the fact of how the fluid evolves as a function of its service lifetime and the contamination from all that server equipment that's going into the fluid. Now, in our experience, one of the things that happens with some of these lower grade fluids is that there's more incompatibilities with these thousands of different materials that were built and designed to run in air, not a dielectric fluid. And we within Intel are doing an incredible amount of testing, and we find new material incompatibilities all the time. But the problem is that every fluid chemistry is a new chemical reaction. So it is impossible for a company that is providing IT equipment, such as Intel, where we're trying to assess the quality and reliability of our products in these fluids, with the overall differences in reactivity. So I think most of you guys all recognize an extremely data-driven process. The gap I see, and this is again one of the things I'm trying to solve with the sub-team, is that the data that we need to actually create some of these requirements isn't even being collected. It isn't even being recognized as needing to be collected. And there needs to be a lot more guidance that I'm also, as I said, trying to evolve within that sub-team to say it's not only the properties of the fluid at T0, it's how those properties and how that the fluid evolves with the contamination that's being extracted from the IT equipment, and that contamination's impact on the material compatibility of all those other products are evolving over time. So I may have a component, and I think everybody recognizes the components, and Intel makes many, many different components. I may have components that may be fine at T0, but then some contamination that's being extracted from another piece of IT equipment is then reacting with my material that I won't find at T0. It's another contaminant that's creating the problem. So there's all these intermediate reactions from the contamination. So I recognize that that's a huge problem, but I think that, we need to address and provide the guidance here to say that you not only need to really understand the T0 properties, but one of the reasons why these lower grade fluids are more of concern is they're more reactive to all the different things that are in the system already. And I would be the first to agree that if I could come up with, the one thing we're missing is halogens. Guys, I can't tell you how bad halogens are. And halogens are present in these oils and create major problems. And we're not even accounting for them. Everybody's talking about sulfur, but there's nothing in there about halogens. And I've seen some pretty egregious failures because halogens get extracted and then react. So these are the types of things that we need to provide more guidance around, is the actual service compatibility, right?
Samantha, I think you phrased the potential for reactions really well in how to, because that basically sums up the concerns that most of the tank manufacturers have with the associated fluids as well, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. And if you think about a tank manufacturer, you guys have a very small wetted materials list compared to a wetted materials list of a server. And as I said, there's a lot of variations out there that it's a huge problem. And, there's a lot of effort that needs to happen in the IT equipment. But at the same time, where do you start evolving that story to even provide guidance when, as I said, even within this team, I think there's a lack of recognition and guidance out there on how to measure contamination, how to address it. Because even all of our fluid specs they say, okay, look at the impact of the fluid on the material, but there's nothing in there yet. As I said, really wanted to put this in as part of my sub-team effort to say, okay, what is the impact of that material on the fluid? Do all the fluid suppliers recognize the problem statement there?
Yeah,
Yes.
so the way I'm looking at it is, I'm wondering if we solve the halogen problem and it was a group 2 and it met all the other requirements, would that be interesting to the industry? And the issue is right now, not at all, right? And not that we can define solving the halogen problem well, not that we're collecting the data well, and not that anything's there, but because we don't have that all down, we're down to synthetic versus unrefined versus this sort of middle ground of refined group 3, which may or may not be considered a synthetic by API, by OCP, have the right data behind it. That's sort of what we're running up against.
And as a company that has customers asking us how to support our products in immersion, what it really comes down to in our case is that we have to go collect the data ourselves to say, okay, does this fluid work? And we find data in various places, and we collect that data, but it's impossible for us to test every single fluid. And there has to be a very specific customer request with the, business motivation for us to go do that. But when we try to balance, okay, what's the ROI, the risk on our investment of having to put all the effort into doing that testing for our very large set of materials, it comes down to, as a component supplier, and I think I speak for every component supplier that's being asked by customers to say, do you warranty your products in immersion? It comes down to, if we're going to invest in testing, that we want to make sure that whatever testing we do has the highest probability of success. And we tend to rely more on the more heavily, the POWs, the fluids that are a little less chemically reactive, because that's what we have more confidence in. And even then, we're still finding incompatibilities. But then how do you provide confidence for a component vendor, right, to say that your fluid has evolved enough with its reactivity to say that I can have value in testing my products in your fluid? That's going to be the question you actually have to answer, because in order for customers to actually embrace immersion, they're going to be looking at the component vendors to say, do you support this fluid, right? So I think that you might have to flip that around a little bit and actually ask more component vendors to say, what do you need to see for you to say that you have confidence to test your products in my fluid? Right now, we really won't touch most mineral oils because we know that it's just not, haven't seen any data to say I should be confident that it's not more reactive than the POW fluids, which I already know I have incompatibilities with, right?
Get it.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point, Samantha, to kind of open up and see if any of the fluid suppliers here, in this case, anyone who might be considering using some of these other fluids to respond to.
Peter, I think there's quite a few hands that have been up for quite some time. The people that have been very eager to ask a question. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I think
Give that a
Mariam had a hand up first.
Yes, yeah, thank you. So this is Mariam from HF Sinclair. I'm coming from transformer oil and lubricants industry. So we are serving transformer industry for about long years. So it's something that we have. I just wanted to provide some comments about compatibility, because we have experience with both. We have done a lot of testing with high quality mineral oils and also synthetic oils. So in terms of compatibility for transformer oil industry. So I just wanted to highlight that we have seen, based on the testing and the experience that we have in that industry, we've seen pros and cons for both type of fluids. For example, for synthetic oil, we have seen for compatibility, so for example, shrinkage of some elastomers. So I think that based on being data-driven can help to see pros and cons for each base fluid. So even though, for example, we have a lot of data in terms of comparing synthetic oil with high quality mineral oils in terms of oxidation stability and fluid life. And we could see that they are, for example, the data can show that how they, in terms of pros and cons, I can say that can help to clarify some of those things. So just wanted to support the idea that being data-driven can really be helpful. Yep, just as a comment.
Yep, another great point. Chris, I think you were the next one with your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add a comment to maybe provide some guardrails to the conversation. I am afraid that by bringing this question to the team, I might be opening up the discussion around all of the potential refined products, as opposed to broadening the scope to the higher quality group 3 base oils. It's typically understood within the industry that due to the extreme processing that these oils go through, they are considered synthetics because the chemical structures of the hydrocarbon chains are manipulated enough through the process that it's considered synthetic. Don't ask me why, because I am not that kind of chemist. I think they're more engineers than chemists, but I would like to maybe focus the conversation around the group 3 base oils, which are very high quality materials, and not consider the group 1s and the group 2s that are typically what a lubricants person would think of when you say a mineral oil, because that may have been some of the early products that were developed were the group, maybe a group 2 base oil that led to some of the incompatibilities or materials issues that were observed early on. I'd like to just talk about extending the scope beyond GTL and PAO. GTL is a type of group 3 base oil. PAO is a type of group 4 base oil. I just would like to see the scope center around a conversation of other potential group 3s that could perform well in this application.
Yeah, my quick response to that, and I don't know if anyone else wants to add. What I'm sensing is, and listening to Samantha's comments too, I'm sensing that the challenge might be more, rather than having this label-based classification on supposed quality and different definitions, API, whatever. I think the challenge might be just more the fact that there are certain types of fluids that have been historically used in immersion cooling with great success, right? Without any major issues, etc. Right? There's a kind of historical set of data that we can go back to and point to. And the challenge, say from someone like Samantha's point of view, is if we look at using these new fluids, we don't have that set of data to go to, right? That's the kind of gap that we're facing when it comes to looking at non-PAO, non-GTL hydrocarbons.
I would almost say that the contrary to the or that evidence of incompatibility has historically been
true,
been more more present than non-present, which is why everybody is taking their hands off it. Sorry, I'm speaking. There's other people with hands up.
Yep. So Ying Yang, I think was the next one with hand up.
I just want to continue on Chris' comments on that because for mineral oil, there are different processing. Some of them are simply solvent extraction, those group 2, group 1 type of oil. So I agree, those one probably not meeting the application requirement here, but some of them are severely hydrocracked. So the molecules are much more uniformed. So that's possibility. Those type of base oil could be used in here. Just want to comment on that. And also regarding to Samantha's comments on the contamination compatibility, so I'm thinking about definitely. I mean, it's going to be hard to test each fluid for long term. I mean, I'm just wondering, is there a way to design a acceleration test or some type to screen the candidates? Just a thought. Thank you.
Okay. Sona, I think, was up next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, this is Sonia Savakova. I just wanted to pose a question to the group. I know we talk a lot about fluid and design of fluid or selection of fluid around compatibility with the existing set of materials used in this space. The thinking longer term, and that certainly limits, right, fluid choices to some degree. And there's appears to be no perfect combination of things today, right? There's some potential issues with all of the sets, more or less, some, more compatible than others. But if you think about the space and the industry, I mean, there's been decades upon decades, right, of materials being used in the oil industry. And there's certainly materials that exist today that are compatible with oils, not materials that have been traditionally used in air-cooled data centers, but certainly, there's probably not a huge leap in innovation required to get a subset of materials that would be compatible with immersion fluids in a better way than existing sets are. I mean, are we thinking about, what some of the lower hanging fruit is with existing polymeric materials and cable companies that might have access to those to improve overall compatibility and not open up the space in terms of necessarily having access to more fluid, but just improving the compatibility situation rather than trying to thread and needle in the existing space? Are we looking forward into kind of what the future materials may be after we've entered, immersion is more established and maybe people decide, okay, well, it's actually, we should change this material. Because we are, putting limitations around fluid development based on what we see today in terms of raw materials used, but that may not be what is in existence in the future.
So, yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I think a few people have kind of made the point about not wanting to limit fluid development. But I guess I would throw a question back to you guys that what benefit would the community be getting from opening up to these other types of fluids which are currently not recommended?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think we should hear from the industry, tell what's the new value that they will be bringing into the market, especially for end users.
I think Sonia was saying something different. Like, let's just, I'm going to be,
go ahead.
I'm going to be a little blunt. Let's just say we throw PVC wire insulation under the bus, right? We just say, don't use it anywhere. And then we say, and the best alternative is this, and this. And, you can try these other ones, but you have to do material compatibility testing on it, right? And the best ones are there's an oil resistant one, there's FEPs, right? So we could do that for every functional category that we've already looked at and see if there is someone that's the best choice, a material that's the best choice, and then work on getting SKUs that are the best choice that would be acceptable in the industry. And yes, it would be a shame that we can only build servers with wires made with FEP for immersion. But hey, you know, if it helps the market, right?
I think PVC is the least of our problems here.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry to say.
Skip that, Rolf. But
yeah,
just
exactly.
skip that. Pick the biggest problem then, and just take my idea and spin it that way, because I can tell you that that's the problem.
So I think, so let me chime in
alternatives.
here, Brian. I think the challenges you are referring can be manageable in the market by changing components, but we are here looking at a bigger issue. If there is something that we are really missing by not bringing a fluid into the market, that is actually going to give much more beneficial opportunities for end users. That is basically the conversation we are really interested in, not changing component A, component B, but its holistic is what's the value that we are currently missing in the industry today that we want to bring in a newer fluid, and that will play a bigger role in making a push for immersion going forward in the market.
I see it the other way. What component is put on an air-cooled server that is not taken off, that's causing a problem for group 3 ultra refined synthetic fluids like GTL, CTL, etc.
So, hey, Brian, I understand where you're coming from, right? And I don't disagree with the notion of starting with the biggest problems and going down. I mean, that's the logical approach, right? The challenge that I have seen in personal experience while building up my own company, but also in the rest of the industry, and if looking at the different fluids that have been used and have been tried, the problem is not so much the fluid itself. That is sure, that is where the fluid suppliers can have a lot of influence over how they control the fluid, how they manufacture. Yes, there's a lot of innovation. The real challenge is, especially when comparisons, for example, are made with transformers, it's the amount of variables that you run into when we're looking at immersion cooling in the data center industry compared to the transformer industry. The amount of different types of components and materials that are used in the assembly of a motherboard, let alone a whole server, let alone a customer equipment which has been assembled from maybe 100 different brands that have been integrated into a server. I'm referring to cables, network cards, different connectors, they all come from different parts and different sections of supply chains. And this is also the problem that Samantha is referring to. It's the sheer amount of components of integrated supply chain brands somewhere that can come from different factories along the world that sometimes may have been built with slightly different materials, but because it was originally designed for air, that has never been something to look out for in a supply chain process for designing and building servers. Those are the variables that are adding to the immense complexity of supporting fluids for microelectronics in the context of IT equipment. There is for every server specification, you can have 1,000 different configurations based on different brands, different chips, and different assemblies. Right? That's the problem. That's the real challenge.
Yeah. And yeah, so, you know, one thing that we've seen is an increasing number of these component suppliers are coming to us and asking us to do compatibility studies with their materials. And I think that there is an increasing awareness of this. One easy way is to look across the compatibility tables and find materials that are compatible with every fluid and work with that. But even with PVC, I mean, we've done studies with that, and you know, the compatibility is based on the molecular weight selection of the base PVC. And there's a reason why PVC was used with cabling and wires, and that's because of the, you know, the values, you know, the electrical values that helps with, you know, signal integrity. So, you know, going to FEP or ethylene brings in other problems in itself. So, you know, there's ways in which the industry can be smart about selections of materials that make it better for compatibility in immersion systems. And just a lot of people don't have that chemical background. They don't have a lot of experience with doing compatibility because they haven't been a concern in the past. And the more they're educated on this, the more the better they are going to be in selecting the materials that they use. And you know, when it comes to like printing, you know, plastic components and things like that, those, you know, those ability to have a thermally fluid material that will harden to components brings other issues when it comes to compatibility in an immersion system. So that, you know, that needs to be addressed.
Okay, and I'm sure I think a lot of people have more comments, and we could keep talking about this for a while. We're a couple of minutes over the hour already, so I think we'll leave it here for this call. And what I would suggest is that we perhaps pick this up in the next call. If people have suggestions in the meantime, or just or additional points that they'd like to make, if you could email those to Praneeth or myself, that would be great, so that we can structure the discussion for the next call. Yeah.
Hey Peter, would you mind me complimenting you on the preparation of the materials? I really love the slide deck and the outline of what you prepared, and I just want to add that I genuinely like this conversation that took place today, and I feel that this is a really valuable one.
Yeah, thanks, Rolf. And it definitely sounds like, I know it wasn't something that we brought up recently, but it sounds like we definitely need to have the discussion. So happy to keep discussing in the future, and also chatting to Amy offline. It sounds like we can also coordinate a lot with the requirements work stream on some of this too.
Peter, can you reach out to me, because part of what I'm trying to do also complements this work on how to provide more guidance for fluid vendors to look at the contamination of components. But I need your help on something. So can you reach out to me, please?
Yep, we'll do, Samantha.
Peter, one, maybe you can just give a briefing on where we are with fluids and handling document, so that people can understand what's the next steps and when we are planning on pushing this through the incubation committee, please.
Right. So yeah, I mean, really quickly, Spencer and I are going to finish that off, the draft of this week, clean up all of the comments, the final comments that we received, and we'll actually be in touch with Rolf, I think, on how to submit that to the incubation committee, and if we need to do any other steps. Okay. So yeah, now we're 4 minutes over, so I think I'm gonna close the call there. Thanks everyone for attending, and looking forward to having you on the next call.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.